Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Some folks are still getting connected and joining, but I will go ahead and get us started for the morning. Welcome again. I'm Crystal Sheasley, Program Manager with the Environmental Finance Center at the University of Maryland. And we are really pleased to be hosting today's session on assessing the affordability of drinking water rates. And I'm just realizing I want to share my screen with you. Just a moment. All right, can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes, all good here.
Okay, thank you. Welcome again. So this training is part of the Smart Management for Small Systems program offered through the Environmental Finance Center Network, which works to create solutions to the how to pay issues of environmental protection and improvement. And our Smart Management program provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all US states and territories to help local water systems achieve their goals and stay in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And in just a moment, I will hand things over to my colleague, Omid Barr, Project Director at the University of North Carolina Environmental Finance Center. But first, I would just like to cover our learning objectives for today's session. These are to characterize some of the affordability challenges that may affect water systems customers, name multiple metrics that can be used to gauge affordability, feel equipped to use UNC's Water and Wastewater Affordability Assessment Tool, and learn some best practices for assessing affordability and tracking it over time. And finally, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Participants are muted, but we will have a couple of breaks for questions. And you may also chat your questions, comments in the chat box as we go, and we'll make sure to address those during our question breaks. And in just a moment, we will be asking for some of you to volunteer where you are joining from today. But in the meantime, please feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourselves. You can identify your name, organization, so you all can see who's calling today. And some of you have already requested a certificate of participation for participating in today's session, and we are happy to provide those. Just make sure that you stay for the whole session, and then let me know if you would like to receive a certificate for participating in the training. You can email me there. Okay, and with that, I will hand it over to Omid. Omid, thank you so much for joining us and presenting this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much, Crystal. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. All right, is everyone seeing my screen all right?
Looks great.
Great. So yeah, as Crystal said, my name is Omid Barr. I'm a project director at the University of North Carolina's Environmental Finance Center. I run a whole range of topics of research, from running technical assistance to small water and wastewater utilities, to doing some policy research as well on like affordability programs. So a whole gamut of topics that we do at the Environmental Finance Center at UNC. And like UMD, UNC EFC's mission is dedicated to enhancing the ability of governments and other organizations to provide environmental programs and services in a fair and effective way through financially sustainable ways. So we do that through direct advising, applied research like policy research, and as well as teaching and outreach events like this. So today's objectives that I wanted to go over for the presentation are: one, to make the case for an affordability as an important utility consideration. Then we're going to demonstrate the EFC's new Affordability Assessment Tool. And this tool can be used to analyze your community's rates and how affordable they are for a whole range of customers. And for this part, I'll be actually doing a live demo of our tool. So as Crystal said, we're hoping to have you put in the chat maybe your name, as well as the community you're from, the utility that you may be representing. And I'll ask for like a brave volunteer, or pick one from the chat if you're comfortable with it, and we can analyze your community's rates just from the affordability aspect. So that'll be a part we'll get to later in the presentation when we're live demoing the tool. Other objectives of the presentation include identifying the existence of an affordability challenge, and then introducing some approaches to help low-income customers pay for their water and sewer bills. So first question I wanted to get at is inequity and environmental equity. So what does equity mean? So like to put broadly, equity describes, maybe a country or a world in which no group or community would face disadvantages in dealing with environmental hazards, disasters, pollution, and ideally no one should need extreme wealth or any political connections to protect the well-being of their families and communities. So in the past 18 months, I think, from what we've been experiencing with the pandemic, have reinforced how crucial safe and reliable water service is to protect public health. And then there's environmental or economic consequences of the pandemic as well, which have underscored the need to maintain the affordability of this resource. And so when confronting affordability, utility leaders may be asking, how much is it reasonable to expect households of limited means to pay? And what economic sacrifices are reasonable as well? And so across the state and the country, we've seen the cost of water rise, which makes this critical public service increasingly difficult for a lot of people to afford. One of the main driver for this increasing cost is that local water utilities face collectively billions of dollars in cost to replace pipes, upgrade their plants, addressing other points of failure within their systems. And they do this while dealing at the same time with, in some cases, increasingly extreme storms. Or maybe mounting concerns regarding their water quality or their water quantity or both. And so to keep up with infrastructure costs, utilities have been scrambling to generate more revenue. And in many places, this means significantly higher water rates for households. So the average monthly residential bill has risen by nearly 50% since 2010. And this is far faster than incomes have grown. And so as these rates are rising, water affordability really becomes a core issue for lower income households in all types of regions across the country. And so there are no permanent state or federal programs to help low-income customers afford water and sewer service like there is for energy. And so local programs may be an exception rather than a rule as well. So where they exist, local programs can sometimes only provide limited, maybe short-term assistance and may not be well funded. And we'll get into some examples later, but water utilities, especially small ones, can have a harder time self-funding low-income programs because their customer bases are just much smaller. They lack that economy of scale. And so then the US EPA has some national affordability guidelines as well. The Safe Drinking Water Act had established special assistance in those communities that have an average residential bill of over 2% of the median household income. And current EPA guidance combined with drinking water and wastewater bills are affordable if they don't exceed 4.5% of MHI. And so these numbers are strictly for making decisions about regulatory policy, and they go back to forcing systems to make upgrades on combined sewer overflows. So if the combined cost of the infrastructure needed to comply with regulations is greater than 2% per household, then the EPA would delay the timeline that's needed to make upgrades to comply with regulations. But the EPA will never make a decision on whether a single bill is affordable or unaffordable. But by proxy, this 2% number has become a threshold in the water world. And so the EFC, we don't advocate for using this number as a cutoff for affordability. And that's because at the end of the day, a utility has to provide clean and safe to drink, as well as reliable water. And for some systems, this will just end up costing more. So there is some proposed guidance introduced by the EPA for 2022 that updates some of the guidelines on affordability, and I will touch on that a little bit later in the presentation as well. So water affordability, as I mentioned earlier, is typically measured by the annual cost of water bills as a percentage of median household income. And so households that pay an amount for water that exceeds an affordability threshold are considered to be paying a cost that may be unaffordable. And so the median household income is a bit of a flawed metric in itself, right? It's by definition indicates the income level that half of the households in the community make more or less than. So the distribution of incomes can be skewed in many different and sometimes strange ways, right? So I'll describe a little example. If two communities say have an MHI of $40,000, right? So in one community, nearly everyone is making between $38,000 and $42,000, right? Right around that MHI. But the second community, maybe 40% of the households are below the poverty line. And another 40% have very high income levels. So if the rates that are charged in the two communities are identical, then the percent MHI values will also be identical. But the affordability of the rates for the first community, the one that's around 38,000 and 42,000, they'll be very different than the affordability of the same rates in the second community, where 40% of the households are below the poverty line and are paying much higher portions of their income for water and wastewater service. And this is a little table that I have here from the Brookings Institute that I borrowed that shows the bottom 10 cities by share of lower income households with related medium income charge. And so there's a huge percentage of households underneath the poverty line in these major cities all across the US. And so I have a screenshot here of the affordability tool that I'll show a little bit later. And this is showing various different like socioeconomic metrics, right? So other common metrics for measuring affordability include the rate of unemployment and maybe the percentage of households on Social Security, or the percentage of households available for SNAP and supplemental security benefits, as well as percentage of households that are below the poverty line. So putting additional metrics when you're looking at affordability paint a broader picture by providing more context about a community. So let's say, for example, an aging population may indicate a future population decline with reduced revenue from rate charges. That's something important for a utility to consider. Communities considering implementing affordability programs, economic information such as levels of unemployment or maybe reliance on social safety net programs can guide decisions about qualifications for reduced utility rates. Additionally, a user can see how these measures compares to the state average, and that's something that the tool provides as well. So going into the tool, to give a little bit of background, 7 years ago, I think roughly, the EFC had UNCEFC debuted an Excel-based version of a water and wastewater rates assessment tool. And so what the tool did was guide utilities to assess the relative affordability of water and wastewater rates on residential customers using multiple economic characteristics. And so we use this tool. I mean, the tool has been used during technical assistance visits to communities and has also been requested by utility managers and local officials all over the country. So the original version of the tool required users to look up American Community Survey info, like ACS info on the Census Bureau's website, and then input the selected economic characteristics onto an Excel sheet. And so entering the data allowed the tool to calculate indicators of affordability and then show the results in the forms of graphs and tables. And so this process was a little bit tedious and arduous given the information is all there and we could just fetch it from an API. So we've developed a Tableau-based dashboard tool that helps water and wastewater utilities assess affordability of their rates for different classes of customers. And so the tool displays socioeconomic data for any census place, that's the geographic distinction we use here in the US, showing the impact of water and wastewater charges on a range of customers based on income class. And then we use the most recent available census data from 2019 with plans to update it when the most available census data becomes available for us to fetch. And the tool's goal is to give utilities a way to quickly see how particular rate decisions might impact all of their customers and not just customers with the average income. And so before I live showcase the tool, I'm just going to walk you all through it using a real small systems data that we've worked with, but I blocked their name out. So here we're looking at the input tab, which contains an interactive interface that allows the user to enter both location and rates information. So the first step in the tool is to enter your state from a drop-down menu. Then you can geographically select your county, which will bring up a census place map. Underneath the geographic selection tiles are boxes to enter utilities' current combined residential water and wastewater charges. And then current charges are what the customer is currently paying, while alternative charges, alternative charges are what a utility may be considering raising their rates to. And so we recommend putting in a number that represents average customer charges. So each utility has a different average customer charge, but a typical range is between 4,000 and 6,000 gallons per month for a household. And so this input page contains all the information that the user has to enter. After this, the user can navigate to like the next button or the socioeconomics tab at the top of the page. And so this tab shows how a selected census place will then compare to its state using several affordability metrics. So we use the census data, and the tool shows the following three metrics that I'm going to show for now is MHI, poverty rate, and unemployment. And so in this example, we can see that the census place chosen shows a somewhat mixed picture of affordability, right? So if we just looked at the MHI as a threshold of affordability, we would think that the general population of the town should be able to afford their water rates. I mean, we haven't looked at what the water rates for the town are as yet as a percentage of the MHI, but you could maybe expect that the general population is relatively comfortable paying their bills. But you know, the median income, as I said, is just that. Half the homes in the area earn more and half earn less. So if we look at other affordability metrics, such as the poverty rate, we can start to see a bit of a disparity appear. So the poverty rate for the town is actually higher than the state's poverty rate, which indicates that the town has a higher concentration of residents living below the poverty line, although the MHI is still high. And you know, the poverty rate identifies areas maybe where poverty is more concentrated, which has important implications for public health. So in essence, like any effective reduction in disposable income among these low-income households could adversely affect their ability to pay for needed food, heat, medical care, in addition to water. And so another indicator of affordability that we're showing here is unemployment. And this is the number of unemployed people as a percentage of the labor force. And so in this example, unemployment rate is also higher than the state level. And unemployed persons may not have a stable source of income, which also increases the uncertainty that they would be able to meet or pay their next water bill. And we can examine some other metrics further as well. And we can see other interesting characteristics about the town. So there's a lower percentage of customers that use SNAP or food stamp benefits compared to the state, but a higher SBM rate. And so I'll explain what an SBM rate is. To give a little background, I'll start by saying that it can be argued that the poverty rate does not really provide an accurate measure of the number of households that are truly living in poverty conditions. So households with incomes that are significantly higher than the poverty level often experience severe hardships as well, including hunger, lack of needed heating and cooling, maybe the inability to afford medical care. So to obtain a more accurate measure of households living in poverty conditions, the US Census Bureau had developed a supplemental poverty measure, and this was back in 2010. And so this factors public assistance factors in financial support offered to low-income households. This includes like housing subsidies, maybe low-income home energy assistance. And it also recognizes that there are some non-discretionary expenses that these households may bear, as well as such as taxes, out-of-pocket medical expenses. And it also takes into account geographic adjustments for differences in housing costs. And so looking at all these metrics together, it allows a user, or the utility leader, or whoever's using the tool to understand affordability from a broader perspective, and it provides more context about a community. So if you're a community that's considering maybe implementing an affordability program, economic information such as levels of unemployment or reliance on social safety net programs can help guide decisions about the qualifications for maybe some reduced utility rates or reimbursements for your utility rates. So once you view all the socioeconomic metrics, the next tab is the assessment one, and this is the final tab of the tool. So this shows current rates and alternative rates entered side by side. So this slide only has the current rates for the same town we used in the previous example. This is the current rates, actual current rates of the town that we blanked out. And so the income groups, as we see here, are broken into bins, and they're shown along the x-axis of the graph. And the tool calculates the average bill as a percentage of the upper limit of each bin. And so I think it's really important to calculate affordability at the individual household level, not by using median income. So the tool breaks up income groups in the same way that the census does. It highlights, and the tool also highlights the first three columns as red, which indicates that these are low-income households earning below the poverty level or the federal poverty level. And we can see that households in the lowest income group, this is the 0 through 10,000, sorry, dollars a year, are paying 4.6% of their annual income on water bills. And since this is for their combined water and sewer bill, this is actually relatively maybe not super unaffordable, especially compared to other utilities that the EFC has worked with. But it's also according to the EPA's guidance for affordability for the median household. And so the median household in this community, which pays 0.6%, see here, 0.6%, the population of the community, we can also see distribution of the community as well through this line graph. And sorry, I forgot to mention that the highest point here, the most population is earning $50,000 to $75,000 a year. That's 0.6% of their annual income of their water bills, and they have very affordable rates. And so the lowest income customers are slated with more inequitable bills in comparison, which forces them to pay for or pay more of their lower income for this necessary service. And so the tool also allows the user to enter in alternative rates and view them in the same way that we view the current charges. And so these alternative charges, what I mean by this is a variety of things. So this could be compared to wastewater. This could be compared to outside rates to customers that are living outside the city limits that are still connected to the system, or any proposed rates that the system is considering raising to for the next fiscal year. And so for these specific numbers, I used a neighboring community with higher rates to illustrate the impact on the bills. So if the community decided to raise its rates to match its potential need for capital infrastructure investments, say, the lowest income customers would still pay the brunt of the burden. And it's really important to see the impacts on equity that raising the rates has, especially when it may be easy to make the assumption that since the community has a high MHI, that customers would be comfortable paying the costs. So I'm not trying to say here that the utility shouldn't raise rates. Actually, really the opposite. Utilities need to raise rates every single year, or at least examine or do a rates analysis every year to see if they need to match the cost of infrastructure investments that they have. They might have depreciating assets. I think every system has a depreciating asset. But it's really important to consider that, that there are implications that the current or proposed rates would have on more vulnerable customers. So there are real costs of unaffordable water, which can put disadvantaged households at a higher risk of losing their health or their home. So this community could maybe consider establishing a customer assistance program to help relieve the burden on lower income customers, but we'll get into solutions for that later into this presentation. What I wanted to do now was actually do a little live demo of the tool. So I can click on it here, and also opening up the chat to see if there is anyone who would be interested in volunteering their community for us to look at. We're just going to be showing exactly how we go through the tool. I see a couple utilities posted in here. Bethlehem, William Ross, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I'm just picking on people in the chat right now. I don't mean to like pick anyone out, but if you're comfortable with me looking at it, so I can put it into the tool. All right, thank you. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I should be able to find that. So here is the instructions page. I hope everyone can see the screen here. And this kind of just guides the users in a kind of a similar way that I talked about the tool. It says everything you need to know, and then you can either click on input or next page to go to the next page. And we'll give it Tableau a second to load. And so here we are at the input page. And so from here, we can go to Pennsylvania. Here we go. And that zooms us in here. And I'll search here because I don't really know where which county Bethlehem is in. So I'm not from Pennsylvania, but I will Northampton. Well, I can, let's see. Well, I'm going to search it in here, Northampton County. And from here, we can pull up the county and then the census place. And then the town was, sorry about that, Lower Saucon Authority. Would you mind putting in the chat, Lower Saucon Township? Let's see. This is the joys of doing a live demo. Arlo, Saucon. Okay, so I'm going to search to see if Saucon comes up here. Pennsylvania. Would you mind tell me what town or what census place might be close enough to Saucon? Sometimes, like if I don't know the census place on the thing, it might if it's like a really small town, I might just go to the closest census place available to what the Hillerton Borough. Okay, Hillerton Borough. And from here, I'm going to go to the rates dashboard. So what UNC EFC has is dashboards for a number of states. We don't have one for Pennsylvania, but I'm going to just put in some charges in right now. But normally I would go to, like, say if I wanted to go to North Carolina or any state that's worked with us in the past. If I'm unaware of the rates and I'm running this tool as a technical assistance for someone else, I could like look up what the rates that they have submitted to us in the past are. So we haven't worked with Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania state in the past, but these are the states we have worked with. I'm just going to put in a number here, and it's going to be purely just example purposes to say what the residential charge would be for water and sewer at 4,000 gallons. So let's just say $40, and this is not representative of your town whatsoever. And we're going to say, we're going to raise it to 50. And this is just purely just to show how the tool might work. And we can also see here that the county MHI range is from, this says unknown when the census place does not have, some towns may have not submitted any like MHI, or there's not available data on the census. Other counties will say the lowest MHI to the highest MHI within the county. And so this is not taking into account the rates that I just entered. This is just the socioeconomic metrics, and we can quickly look at these compared to the state level. So for Hellerton Borough, not Lower Suckton Township, sorry about that. It was hard for me to find. But essentially, you can go and compare MHI in dollars and lower poverty rate, unemployment, the population, and the food insecurity, as well as the SPM rate, all to the state level. And so this might help provide like a broader picture of affordability for the town, and kind of look at some like additional metrics that you as a person from the town probably already know, but can help put it into like a visualized quantitative format. And so we'll go to the next page for the assessment part. And so here we can see based on these like imaginary rates that I just entered, what the affordability of the water and wastewater rates are for Hellerton Bureau at 2019 and 2020 income levels. And so we can see here the distribution of the population, which is accurate. The population is, finds itself along this level. You can see from the shaded line graph. And then percent annually spent on bills. We can see that like 4.8, like the smallest, or the lowest income group pays 4.8% of their annual household income on their water bills. And we can see if we wanted to raise the rates, how that would impact the percent annually spent on bills. And we also have this toggle that switches between all households, including renter occupied and then owner only occupied households. So the renter occupied households, residents may not know how much they're paying for their water bill. It may be paid by the apartment complex or whatever the landowner is. Owner occupied households puts all the people who are paying their water bills directly, and we can examine the population. We can see how the population shifts for that metric. So those are some of the this is just like a live demo of the tool and some of the things that it offers for people who are interested in examining the affordability of their rates earlier. I see Mary Hill has put in Hobson Artesian Well Association located in Suffolk, Virginia. So I probably can look up Suffolk, Virginia and see what the census place is. But if there are specific like pockets of, say like poverty, unemployment, this tool may not be the best for capturing where those pockets might be, but we can kind of look and see overall based on the closest census place where that might be. And so Suffolk, I think, is near the coast. I'll go to that. Suffolk, I can also search Suffolk, Virginia. And so what we have for this is just Suffolk City. So that's a high, like this MHI shows, let's see if I can go. Yeah, all we have here is Suffolk City, and we would be able to look at enter the monthly residential charge and alternative charge for whatever Suffolk might be. I don't know if we have, we do have Virginia. And we can view the dashboard here. And from here, I would search Suffolk or Hobson. Let's see. Well, apologies for some data that we're missing essentially, but that's the dashboards can show whatever data we've collected from utilities that we've worked with in the past, and this one shows all the census places that exist in the Census Bureau database. But If that applies to your utility, this tool can really work for you, I would say. So I'm going to go back to the presentation real quick. And next page. And as I said earlier, I wanted to comment on US EPA's proposed 2022 Financial Capability Assessment Guidance. And so, the US EPA is updating its 1997 CSO guidance for the financial capability assessment. And they're going to be evaluating impact to the household and then the community using 4 different metrics to determine financial capability. 2 of the metrics are old ones that have, they're from the 1997 guidance, and they're recommending 2 new metrics as well that include a lowest quintile income and poverty as well, a poverty indicator. And so the poverty indicator includes 5 elements from census data that are basically ones that are overlap with this tool as well, including like percent of population with income below 200% of the federal poverty income level, I believe, as well as percent of the population on SNAP benefits, vacant households, any trend in household growth, and then percent of unemployed population of 16 or and over in the labor force. And so I just want to mention that EPA is currently accepting public comment on whether this update should incorporate lowest quintile income and poverty indicators as a single metric, and they're accepting public comment on this for the next few weeks. So going into some potential solutions to any affordability challenges that a town may have. So water utilities, you all may be well aware of the impact that water bills have, especially on your economically vulnerable customers and these low income users. So it should be noted that water rate structures are driven by 2 underlying like public finance principles. There's the user pay or benefits principle, as well as full cost recovery. And then there's a challenge that occurs when determining who pays these costs, right? And there's conflict between user pay or benefits principle, as well as any affordability issues emerging when low income users cannot afford their full cost recovery water rates. But despite this conflict, there's a lot of some local utilities have begun to implement alternative water rate structures that can encourage conservation, as well as providing additional revenues and reducing costs for low income users. So for example, in Cape Fear in North Carolina, the pandemic really shone a light on the financial struggles that their ratepayers were facing. And this is something we saw with utilities across the state from surveys that was conducted by the EFC. And so what Cape Fear's plan was to shift the financial burden for their really expanding infrastructure to heavier users. And the basic idea was that households that use less water would pay less per gallon, and those using more would pay more per gallon. So the plan thus shifts the financial burden for their ever expanding infrastructure that needs to accommodate for reverse osmosis treatment to remove like PFAS and Gen X compounds from the drinking water sources. And it pushes that burden to the heavier user customers that are driving the need for and the cost of a greater capacity. So in theory, this would make the billing more equitable and would also make water bills more affordable for more households. The question is really that whether the balance can be achieved with, say 80% of the households paying lower rates and just 20% paying more. So this is a potential solution that involves restructuring rates rather than a customer assistance program, which I'll get into now. So, so some utilities have also created various forms of customer assistance programs or CAPs. And these can help avoid costs and provide eligible ratepayers, financial assistance in affording their water bills. And so, OASIS is this program in the town of Cary in North Carolina. It's a program to help people going through financial hardship. So assistance is provided by way of donations from other utility customers, as well as it's also administered through a partnership between the town and a ministries crisis organization. It's a local nonprofit that helps people in need get back on their feet. So this, compared to many large utilities, are often a better position to offer financial assistance and offer more robust customer assistance programs. But utilities of all sizes have customers who need help, and small systems can learn from the successes of larger ones, such as partnering with a local nonprofit organization to administer the program. And so they're successful when they are accessible to low-income customers, through simple application procedures or maybe automatic enrollment, and they can help users lower their future bill with education and promotion of water-efficient devices. And I have one more cap to show you. It's in Shelby, North Carolina. It's a different type of customer assistance program that takes the burden off customers who are struggling to pay their bills. It's a yearly plan that allows customers to pay the same amount each month based on the last 12 months billing. And it really takes the surprise out of the utility by stabilizing monthly utility payment throughout the course of the year. And last thing I wanted to say is that legal frameworks that there are a lot of different legal frameworks that influence the feasibility of different types of programs, and they vary by state, right? So I showed you a couple examples from North Carolina, where there's a utility commission that regulates private utilities, and then the state statutes give discretion to municipalities and broad rate setting authorities to government entities that own the utilities. But in North Carolina, there's a limitation on public utilities to use rate revenue to fund caps, since there's a cost service limitation that can be interpreted in the law. But to give an example of a state in the mid-Atlantic that regulates caps, I wanted to look at the Maryland and Maryland Public Service Commission. They're the ones that regulate how rates are set and improve rate modifications for private water, as well as private wastewater companies. They don't own government-owned utilities. So caps like low-income customer assistance programs that are funded by rate revenues currently appear to be prohibited for the commission regulated utilities because of how they interpret any kind of a statutory prohibitions. But all municipalities in the state, government-owned utilities are incorporated by charters, which provide some limited local authority that are subject to the state statutes. So most counties in the state, as well as like City of Baltimore, operate under like a home rule charter, and they have authority to implement low income caps because of that, and they're subject to any limitations that are present in those individual charters. So, it seems that most government-owned utilities have broad authority over rates and charges. There's some notable exceptions like Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission. It's one of the largest utilities in the region. They're subject to greater oversight by the state of Maryland. But what I'm trying to say here is that there's a lot of legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks that are important to consider when looking at setting up a cap in your state. And so, yeah, I thank you so much for your time. I want to say that UNC-AFC, we run technical assistance for communities as part of our small systems grant from the EPA. Technical assistance is free for systems, and we can run analysis for you on things like affordability, rates analysis, checking the financial health of your system, and we can work on trying to answer other questions you might have. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them when we have time, or feel free to shoot me an email. And if I can't answer your questions, I can try to work with other staff members to get back with you, get back to you with something reasonable. So I'll also put a link to the tool in the chat for anyone who is interested in it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hamid. We have some time for questions now. If anyone wants to chat a question, I see William Ross, you shared something about the state of Pennsylvania's assistance program for low-income residents. This looks like a lot of great information here for folks to take a look at. I don't know that there's a question for you, Hamid. But does anybody else have comments or questions that you would like to share at this point before we move on to the rest of the presentation? Hamid, I do actually have a question for you. I'm wondering if a utility has a service area that doesn't align perfectly with, census place, is there a way but maybe they have information about, poverty rates that's kind of more tailored to their service area. Is there a way for those utilities to enter information into the tool, or maybe use the old tool still to be able to kind of get the same reports that you were showing?
Exactly. So yeah, we still have our old tool available on the website. The old tool is Excel based, and you would gather the information from your census place that you're able to find. And that works a lot, especially with cities that find themselves on the border of two states as well, that might have intersecting census places. That's not something the Tableau based tool offers at the moment. But I don't think we can offer it through the limitations of Tableau. But we still offer the Excel-based tool, and we can offer technical assistance. We can help run that tool if you need to as well. The Tableau-based tool provides basically whatever census places we're able to find from the Census Bureau, and just generally show what the rates are, generally show what the socioeconomic metrics are for that area. Mm-hmm. So it kind of gives a little broad picture of it, but also can help influence kind of thoughts in terms of setting rates for the next year.
And I see a question in the chat from David Kane. How does this compare to the proposed 2022 Clean Water Act Financial Capability Assessment Guide published in February?
I think you're referring to my slide on the Financial Capability Assessment Guide. So there, I included that slide to show that they're putting new metrics in terms of the guidance for what determines affordability, and they're accepting comment on basically accepting public comment on the low income poverty LQI, I believe, low income poverty indicator, as well as the other poverty indicator, which includes all those metrics that I mentioned earlier. So they're considering combining them either as one metric or like putting them as two separate ones for like creating a guideline or criteria for assessing affordability. So that's the information I have on the new guidance right now.
Thank you. There's a question from Mary. Mary, I'm asking you to clarify, because I don't know if I fully understand your question. I want contact for assistance for my small rural water system for upgrade. She might be referring to.
The Hobson Artesian Well Associate. I believe that's who you're representing, Mary. Yeah, I think we communicated in the past, and yes, feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to my email, and we will try to find some kind of we can schedule another interview with you and maybe see if there's any kind of technical assistance we can provide in terms of what kind of upgrades or how to pay for specific upgrades for your small well association. But yes, feel free to reach out to my email.
And we will follow up after this session. We'll share the material, and we can provide everyone's contact information again if you didn't get a chance to jot it down.
Yes, I can also put we'll share the PowerPoint presentation, which will have the tool in it as well, but I'll put a link to the tool in the chat right now as well.
Okay, great. Well, we will save a little bit more time, I think, at the end of this session for a few more questions, if any occur to you. Thank you again so much, Amit, and especially for being willing to follow up with folks and provide additional assistance. So the next portion of the session this morning, my colleague at University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center, Jenny Egan, led a project last year to develop case stories on affordability metrics, focusing on a handful of Mid-Atlantic communities. And unfortunately, Jenny was not able to join us today at the last moment, but she pre-recorded her session for us, and we will be sharing that with you now. And I just want to note that Jenny is eager to answer questions following the session. So if you do have any questions about the project or about the presentation, send them to me, and we'll make sure that Jenny follows up with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Egan. I'm with the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center, and I'm here to share a few case studies that we did as part of an EPA assessment of existing affordability guidance. It was part of a national effort, and our case studies were for Salisbury, Maryland, Newark, Delaware, and New Garden Township, as well as Oxford, Pennsylvania. A few of the guidance that were out that when we did our assessment in 2020 and 2021 were an EPA memo, and then some professional guidance from NACWA, AWWA, and WEF. And this is leading up to the current financial capability assessment guidance for affordability that is currently out. So we were one of the EFCs that did a few communities, as I mentioned. There were 20 communities overall, small and medium-sized systems, and we collected data either from online sources and then we conducted interviews with each of the systems, either engineers or public works employees. Some general observations of the challenges that we encountered were that data wasn't available, of course, and it might be lacking at the census level for utility bills, or of course individual household information. We had to do some just generalizations. Two of the case studies were in university towns, which definitely skewed the data for affordability because you have a lot of low income show up in the census data, but they're students. So it does kind of pose a challenge, and there could eventually be guidance for university towns at some point, which might be recommended. And then New Garden, the Pennsylvania towns, New Garden and Oxford, they are actually in the middle of transitioning to private ownership for their public utilities. So Aqua America, which is now Essential Utilities, is in the process or has purchased the sewer authority, and then the Chester Water Authority, that is a large authority that took care of water for Southern Chester County, Pennsylvania, may be purchased as well. That's in the process. So that was a bit of a challenge when we were collecting the data. And just a little bit about the metric assessment, that in general, a lot of times the median household income is used, which you've learned now through the tool that was just reviewed. But a lot of emphasis is placed on the lower income, the 20th percentile. So this is a national example of what that 20th percentile is. So a lot of these metrics are about how it impacts the lower percentiles and not just that median household income. The first indicator is the residential indicator that we reviewed for the 4 areas, Salisbury, Newark, and New Garden and Oxford. And this is color-coded to the benchmarks that have been published for low burden to high burden, or low financial impact to high financial impact. And so this is an average utility bill percent as median household income. So it's the low impact was for New Garden, but the rest are about mid-range, indicating that it's between 1 and 1.99% of the median household income. So that's the average utility bill. It's called the residential indicator. And then you have the household burden indicator and the poverty prevalence indicator. So these are different ones, like I said, getting at that percent as the 20th percentile household income. And that is the water, wastewater. And we did include stormwater if there was charges for stormwater utilities in these communities. And then the poverty prevalence indicator is percent of households below the 200 level federal poverty line. So again, this is really getting at how do these bills impact the lower income. And you can see with the color coding in this matrix, you have the HBI and the PPI in different thresholds. And these communities were either moderate to high burden or low burden in New Garden, Pennsylvania. The WARI is similar to the residential indicator, but it should get at a different scale, a census tract level. But like I said, there were challenges with the idea that that's just not how municipalities track or collect data at the census level necessarily. So that was challenging. And so we just did the average bill for the entire area, the entire municipal area. And there are some proposed benchmarks that a high burden for each water and wastewater, so like a combined total of 4%, would be a high burden if it's above 4%. So this is a percent, average annual bills as a percent of median household income by census tract. But again, we didn't have the census tract level. So that's trying to help isolate the low income areas without diluting the average with higher income households. So this is really trying to do an assessment at different scales. Again, median household income is just sort of a lumped aggregate measure that doesn't get at what particular households may be bearing. The AR20, so affordability ratio at the 20th income percentile. Again, this is the 20th percentile, looking at those lower brackets of income. This is the percent water costs of the 20th percentile income. So as you can see with Newark, it actually exceeded, the percent exceeded the 20th percentile income. And so that would indicate that it is below the affordability threshold, and then the others are above the affordability threshold. So, oh, I'm sorry, Newark was above, well above, and same thing with Salisbury, Maryland, and Oxford. New Garden, again, was below the affordability threshold. So that ratio to the lowest 20th percentile was indicated that it wasn't too high. The others were high. Hours at minimum wage. So you have workers that are earning minimum wage. We know minimum wage is increasing. And this is just to gauge, when you have those minimum wage workers, how do their water bills compare to working minimum wage jobs? So there's no established benchmark, but this is just saying, like, how many hours does someone have to work to cover just these basic utility costs? So New Garden had the highest in this case. They've been low with the others. Oxford also had a high. So they had 13 hours to work to cover these water costs. And this could indicate that it could be changing too with the federal minimum wage or minimum wage increases. But this is just another way to gauge how different households bear these water costs. Household characteristics. So this is just the last couple metrics that are reviewed and data was collected for. And this is just getting a sense of how is the community overall with, for example, poverty rate or household receiving public assistance. The households delinquent in paying bills, as you can see, some just weren't quite sure of the delinquencies, but that's like potentially a sign of stress for households if there's a lot of delinquent bills. Of course, this was also, we tried to separate out the COVID impacts of not being able to pay bills. So like on an average year, we were wondering, but this is as of 2020. So it did include some impacts from COVID. The percentage of households in below the federal poverty line. So in general, these two numbers indicate that this is the university showing up here, that you have below the federal poverty line, but they're not truly impoverished. They are students. And then the living wage percent of households whose hourly household income is below the minimum wage necessary. And this is based on an MIT living wage value. So MIT sets like, what do these different areas need as a living wage? So their hourly household income is below the minimum wage. So these are some, again, indicating the student population most likely being higher. And then percent of households receiving public assistance. So in this case, when we look at these numbers compared to public assistance, typically students aren't on public assistance. So you can see that's where the difference in having high poverty numbers might indicate students or might indicate poverty. Here we're seeing that there's truly assistance received, maybe more in Salisbury. So there might be more of the low income concerns versus Newark, where you don't have the assistance being received. So you have that diversity in the idea that you have students, but in Salisbury, you might also have a higher population of poverty. And shelter cost is the last metric, just kind of, again, gauging with these things that are needed for households to live. How do all of these different utility fees stack up against costs of living and essential costs? So in the cities, when we interviewed, we did ask them, we followed up and said, how would you use these metrics? Are these metrics informative? Some, like Salisbury, already had a private consultant do an affordability assessment and had some pretty good information how to set their rates. And pretty much all of these municipalities do look at affordability in some ways, but it was pretty apparent they don't have like a tracking system that they do regularly to collect information on affordability. So this might help them understand, which metrics they might want to follow, which metrics they have gaps in data in. And it's about telling the story of affordability for that utility. Again, we collected data on water, wastewater, and stormwater to try to get towards that one water, like that integrated sense of, how do we pay for water overall, not just water and waste drinking water, but also increasingly we have to pay for stormwater. So smaller systems may not have to worry too much about that, but these medium-sized systems, again, some of them had utility fees. So again, there's not one way to measure and one threshold that is going to tell you if something's affordable or not. And then the local economic conditions or a university town, or how do you, craft that story about how your rates impact your community and how you determine like what investments are needed is important. So it's not just, one metric, and we reviewed these metrics. And again, 20 case studies. This is the preview of 4 of them. So hopefully, if you have any questions, my contact information will be with Crystal at the end. And take care. Hopefully you found this informative.
Okay, well, even though you're not here, thank you so much, Jenny, for that presentation. And we have a couple of minutes if anyone has additional questions, let's see if I can see the chat for either Amit or for Jenny, which you can share with me. And just want to reiterate that we will be sharing session materials following today's session. So watch your email for that. We'll also be sharing an evaluation survey that we hope you will complete. Let me see if we have any additional questions. Doesn't look like we do. Our contact information is listed here on this last slide. Amit, any closing thoughts from you?
I think that was a great presentation. I wish Jen could be here. That was really great. So yeah, if there's any other questions involving like running technical assistance, yeah, feel free to reach out to my email. I think pretty much covered it in terms of the whole gamut of what affordability means today. So I know it's a lot to take in, and there's a lot that's trying to be done, but it's a huge problem to overcome as well. So I think there's lots of resources that are being developed for it, and these kind of webinars are great. So thank you, Crystal.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for joining us today. And please do follow up with us if we can provide any additional support or assistance. And hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day.